There's no severance package when you work for the mob. Just a shallow grave or a gold watch, and Charlene wasn't getting the watch. She thought keeping her head down and her spreadsheets perfect would keep her safe. She was wrong. He never planned on letting her go. The air conditioning in the Rossi Logistics building was always broken, and Chicago in July was unforgiving. Charlene adjusted her posture in the ergonomic office chair. It groaned softly under her weight. She pulled the fabric of her size 20 skirt down where it had ridden up her thick thighs, wincing at the friction burn developing from her walk from the train station. She was sweating. Her blouse stuck to the deep curve of her spine. It was only 8:15 a.m. She didn't believe in the glamorous underworld. She'd read the thrillers, seen the movies where the mafia was all tailored suits, whispered Italian, and honorable thieves. Reality was a poorly ventilated office park, a lingering smell of cheap bleach over copper, and men who spit chewing tobacco into styrofoam cups. And then there was Leo. The heavy glass door to the inner office swung open, hitting the rubber stop with a sharp crack. Leo Rossi walked in. He didn't look like a movie star. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days and had spent 2 of them fighting off a hangover. His suit jacket was thrown over his shoulder, his tie loosened, the collar of his shirt stained with something dark and suspiciously red. He was broad-shouldered, carrying a kind of dense, coiled mass that made the room feel instantly smaller. "Charlene," he barked. His voice was gravel and nicotine. "Tell me you fixed the routing numbers for the Palermo shipment." "I fixed them yesterday, Mr. Rossi." Charlene didn't look up from her monitor. She knew better. Eye contact was an invitation for a conversation, and conversations with the capo of the Rossi family usually led to subpoenas. "Show me." He stepped behind her desk. Charlene stiffened. He was too close. She could smell him. Black coffee, old iron, and expensive aftershave trying to mask the scent of stale sweat. He leaned over her shoulder, his heavy forearm resting on the back of her chair. She felt the heat radiating off him. She was acutely aware of the space she took up in the chair, the soft, wide expanse of her hips pressing against the armrests, the roundness of her stomach against the edge of the mahogany desk. She always felt clumsy when he was near. Too big, too slow. She clicked open the spreadsheet. "I rerouted the incoming funds through the shell company in Delaware. The taxes are paid. As far as the IRS is concerned, you imported 4 tons of olive oil at a heavy loss." Leo stared at the screen. He breathed out, a long, ragged sound. "You're a lifesaver, Charlene. A goddamn lifesaver. I'm an accountant, Mr. Rossi. You're my secretary. The accounting is a bonus." He pushed off her chair. "Cancel my afternoon and order lunch. Something heavy. Get yourself something, too. Put it on the company card." "I brought a salad," she said automatically, finally glancing at him. Leo stopped at his office door. He looked back at her, his dark eyes scanning her from the top of her messy bun down to where she sat, planted behind the desk. It wasn't a look of judgment. It wasn't pity. It was an entirely clinical, piercing assessment. "You work 14-hour days for me. You handle stress that would give most men a heart attack. You need fuel, Charlene, not leaves. Order a steak. Rare." He slammed his office door shut before she could argue. Charlene sighed, her heavy chest falling. She hated it when he paid attention to her. It was easier when she was invisible. For the first 2 years, she was just the fat girl at the front desk who knew how to use Excel and didn't ask questions about the bruised knuckles of the delivery drivers. She stayed in her lane. She did her job, collected her exorbitant salary, and went home to her cat. But 6 months ago, the feds had raided the warehouse. Leo's previous accountant had panicked and fled, leaving a digital paper trail a mile wide. Charlene had spent 48 straight hours locked in this office, rewriting history. She scrubbed drives, fabricated invoices, and built a fortress of fake numbers that saved Leo from a 20-year sentence. She thought he would fire her afterward. Loose ends were usually snipped in this business. Instead, he doubled her salary, moved her desk directly outside his door, and refused to let anyone else handle his personal files. She ordered the steak. When the food arrived, the office was quiet. Most of the crew had dispersed to the warehouses or the docks. Charlene unwrapped the foil, the smell of charred meat and butter filling the small space. She was halfway through her meal when the front door opened again. She reached for a napkin to wipe the grease from her chin, annoyed at being caught eating. But the man who walked in wasn't a delivery driver. Victor Romano smiled. It was a thin, terrible thing that didn't reach his pale eyes. He wore a pristine grey suit, tailored to an inch of its life. Two enormous men in cheap leather jackets flanked him. "Well," Victor purred, strolling up to her desk, "if it isn't Leo's loyal watchdog, or should I say, his draft horse?" Charlene felt a cold spike of adrenaline. She slowly lowered her fork. She kept her face entirely blank. "Mr. Romano, Mr. Rossi isn't expecting you. Leo doesn't expect a lot of things. It's his biggest flaw." Victor leaned his hands on her desk, invading her space. He looked at the half-eaten steak, then back to her face. "You eat well on Leo's payroll, don't you, sweetheart? Must be nice. Getting comfortable. Taking up so much room." It wasn't the first time a man had tried to make her feel small by pointing out that she was big. Charlene had spent a lifetime building armor against that specific brand of cruelty. She didn't flinch. She just stared at his tie. "Would you like me to see if he's available?" Charlene asked, her tone deadpan. Victor's smile vanished. "Tell him I'm here." Now. The intercom on her desk buzzed before she could touch it. Leo's voice, flat and dangerous, crackled through the speaker. "Send him in, Charlene. And Victor, take your hands off her desk before I break your fingers." Victor scoffed, straightening up. He adjusted his cuffs and walked into the inner office, his goons attempting to follow. "Just Victor," Leo barked from inside. The door shut. The two large men crossed their arms, standing awkwardly in the waiting area, glaring at Charlene. Charlene quietly pulled her keyboard closer. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still. She began typing, not because she had work to do, but because the rhythmic clatter of the keys was the only thing keeping her grounded to the earth. She knew who Victor Romano was. He was the underboss of the Chicago syndicate, technically Leo's superior, though the lines of power were blurring. There was a war brewing. Charlene saw it in the numbers. Less money going to the top, more being hidden in armories and bribes. She closed her eyes for a brief second. "I need to quit." She'd been telling herself that for 6 months. Just one more paycheck, just enough to pay off Mum's medical debt, just enough to move out of state. But the pile of money in her savings account grew, and her excuses wore thin. She was trapped in the gravity of Rossi logistics, trapped by the fear of what happened to people who tried to leave, and, though she would never admit it, trapped by the man behind that heavy oak door. The screaming started at 4:30 p.m. It was muffled by the soundproofing of Leo's office, but Charlene heard the distinct thud of heavy furniture hitting a wall, followed by the shattering of glass. The two goons in the waiting area twitched, reaching into their jackets, but neither made a move toward the door. They were disciplined, or terrified. Charlene's heart slammed against her ribs. The thick flesh of her throat tightened. She pushed her chair back, the wheels catching on the cheap carpet. She stood up. Her knees trembled, bearing her weight, and the sudden, crushing weight of panic. She didn't know what to do. Run? Call the cops? You don't call the cops on the mob. The door violently swung open. Victor staggered out. His pristine grey suit was ruined, torn at the shoulder, and blood poured from his nose, painting his chin crimson. He looked feral, spitting blood onto the linoleum floor. "You're a dead man, Rossi!" Victor shrieked back into the office. "You and everyone in this miserable building!" Victor snapped his fingers at his men. They rushed him out the front door, the glass rattling in its frame as it slammed shut behind them. Silence descended on the office. Charlene stood frozen behind her desk, her hands gripping the edge of the wood so tightly her knuckles ached. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 20. "Leo?" she called out, her voice barely a croak. No answer. Against every survival instinct she possessed, Charlene stepped out from behind the safety of her desk. Her sensible, wide-fit flats made no sound on the floor. She approached his office door, peering around the frame. The room was destroyed. The mahogany desk was overturned, papers scattered like snow. A crystal decanter lay in jagged pieces near the window. And in the corner, leaning heavily against the wall, was Leo. He was breathing in wet, ragged gasps. He held a hand to his side, blood seeping through his fingers, staining his white shirt, a brilliant, horrifying red. A long, shallow slash ran across his cheek, dangerously close to his eye. Charlene gasped, rushing forward. She didn't think about her size or her clumsiness. She just moved. She dropped to her knees beside him. The impact jarred her joints, but she ignored it. "Leo," she said, her voice shaking now. "Oh my God, I need to call an ambulance." He grabbed her wrist. His grip was a vice, bruising and desperate. "No hospitals," he grunted, coughing. A fleck of blood hit his lips. "No cops, just the kit." Bottom drawer. Charlene didn't argue. She scrambled up, her chest heaving, and ran to the filing cabinet. She practically ripped the bottom drawer off its tracks, pulling out the heavy trauma kit he kept hidden under spare printer cartridges. She dropped back down beside him, unzipping the canvas bag. "Take your hand away," she ordered. The panic was still there, buzzing in her ears, but the pragmatic accountant took over. A problem existed. She needed to fix it. Leo removed his hand. It was a knife wound, a deep thrust to the oblique, right below the ribs. It was bleeding heavily, but it wasn't pulsing. "It missed the artery," he rasped, watching her face. "Just a bleeder." "Shut up," she said, tearing open a packet of gauze. She pressed a thick wad of it directly against the wound. Leo let out a sharp, guttural hiss, his head snapping back against the drywall. His eyes squeezed shut. Charlene leaned her weight into her hands, using the mass of her body to apply maximum pressure. She was hovering over him, her face inches from his chest. She could feel his erratic heartbeat against her knuckles. The smell of copper was overwhelming now, mixing with his sweat. "You have to hold this," she said, her voice tight. "I need to get the tape." He opened his eyes. They were dark, dilated from the pain and the adrenaline. He looked up at her. She was sweating, her hair escaping its neat bun, her face flushed red. She looked messy. She looked terrified. And she looked incredibly competent. He moved his large, calloused hand over hers, holding the gauze in place. His fingers brushed the soft, plump back of her hand. The touch was electric, jarring against the violence of the moment. Charlene grabbed the medical tape and began working. She worked quickly, securing the dressing, wrapping it tight. She cleaned the cut on his face with an alcohol wipe. He flinched, but didn't look away from her. "Why didn't you run, Charlene?" he asked quietly. She paused, the bloody wipe suspended in the air. "What?" "When he started yelling, when the glass broke, the smart thing would be to run out the back." "Why did you stay?" Charlene looked at the cut on his cheek, then down to his lips. "I don't know. she whispered. It was the truth. It horrified her. Victor is going to make a move tonight, Leo said, his voice returning to that low, steady rumble. He came here to force my hand. He missed the kill. Now it's a war. Charlene sat back on her heels. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, trembling exhaustion in its wake. She looked at her hands. They were covered in his blood. I'm done, she said. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. They felt heavy and final in the quiet room. I fixed your ledgers. I patched you up. But I am done, Leo. I'm leaving. Tomorrow, I'm not coming in. Leo stared at her. He slowly pushed himself up, wincing as he shifted his weight against the wall. He reached out and grabbed her arm, not with the frantic grip from before, but with a deliberate, heavy hold. He pulled her closer. She stumbled forward, her knees dragging on the carpet, until she was practically entirely pressed against him. He didn't seem to care that she was heavy, that she was soft and unarmored. He anchored her to him. You think you can just walk away now, he said, his voice a dark, rough whisper. I'm just a secretary, she pleaded, her voice breaking. Tears pricked her eyes. I don't belong here. I don't fit in this world. You know where the money is, Charlene, he said, his thumb pressing into the soft flesh of her forearm. You know the shell companies. You know my blood type. You've seen Victor bleed. I won't tell anyone. I swear to God, Leo, I just want to go home. He reached up with his free hand, his knuckles brushing against her jawline. His touch was terrifyingly gentle. It was the touch of a man claiming ownership. Victor knows your face now, Leo stated, a chilling calm settling over him. He knows you're my right hand. If you leave this building alone, you won't make it to your train. Charlene froze. The reality of it crashed over her, suffocating and absolute. The ledgers, the money, the bloody gauze on the floor. She was in the deep end, and she couldn't swim. Leo leaned in, his mouth hovering just inches from her ear. She felt the heat of his breath, smelled the iron of his blood. Love me or hate me, the capo whispered to his secretary, his grip tightening just enough to promise a bruise. Either way, you're staying with me. They took his car. Charlene had to drive. She adjusted the driver's seat of the heavy, armored SUV all the way back, her thick thighs brushing the underside of the steering wheel. She gripped the leather with bloody hands. Leo sat in the passenger seat, his head rolling against the tinted window. He was grey, sweating through the bandages she had hastily applied. Take the Eisenhower, he grunted, his eyes barely open. Exit at Wolf Road. Keep your speed at the limit. No sudden lane changes. Charlene nodded. She didn't speak. Her teeth were clamped down hard on her bottom lip to keep it from trembling. The transition from mundane accountant to getaway driver happened in the span of 15 minutes. The city of Chicago blurred past the windshield, indifferent to the blood drying on her knuckles. She drove with clinical precision. Survival left no room for error. The safe house wasn't a sprawling mansion or an abandoned warehouse. It was a perfectly unremarkable ranch-style home in a quiet, aging suburb. The lawn was freshly mowed. A plastic flamingo tilted lazily in a neighbor's flower bed. It was terrifyingly normal. Charlene parked the SUV in the attached garage, hitting the button on the visor to close the heavy door behind them. The moment the garage motor stopped, the silence in the car became deafening. "Help me up," Leo rasped. She hurried around the hood. When she opened his door, he leaned heavily into her. Charlene braced her feet apart, using her low center of gravity and broad hips to anchor them both. He was a wall of dense muscle and bone, but she held firm. She threw his heavy arm over her shoulder, her arm wrapping around his waist, avoiding his stitched side. "I've got you," she said, her breath catching as his weight settled against her chest. They shuffled into the house. It smelled of stale air and floor wax. The furniture was sparse and covered in dust sheets. She navigated them toward the only bedroom, depositing him onto the edge of a bare mattress. He groaned, falling back onto his elbows. Charlene immediately moved to the window, pulling the heavy blackout curtains tight. She locked the bedroom door, then went to the ensuite bathroom to wash her hands. She scrubbed them with cheap bar soap until her skin was raw and pink, watching the water turn a muddy brown, then red, then clear. When she walked back into the bedroom, Leo was watching her. He had unbuttoned his ruined shirt, leaving his chest bare. Dark hair trailed down a stomach marked by old scars and the fresh, taped-up wound. She stood at the foot of the bed, suddenly acutely aware of how she looked. Her skirt was wrinkled and stained. Her blouse clung to the rolls of her stomach. Her hair hung in frizzy strands around her sweaty face. She felt like a mess. A massive, clumsy mess. "Stop doing that," Leo said. "Doing what?" "Shrinking, or trying to." He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his side. "You spend half your life trying to fold yourself into a neat little box so people won't notice you. It's exhausting to watch." Charlene crossed her arms, instinctively covering her stomach. "I don't know what you're talking about. You took control of my bleeding. You drove my car out of the city without drawing a single eye. You carried half my body weight into this house without buckling." His dark eyes locked onto hers, stripping away the defensive layers she'd spent years building. "You're built like a fortress, Charlene. Stop apologizing for taking up space in a world that's trying to crush you." The bluntness of his words hit her like a physical blow. Men usually ignored her body or mocked it. They didn't analyze it as an asset. They didn't look at her with that intense, predatory respect. "I'm not a fortress," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I'm a hostage." Leo shook his head slowly. "You're a necessity. And right now, you're the only person I trust." He pointed to a black duffel bag sitting in the corner of the room. "Open it." Charlene hesitated, then walked over. She unzipped the heavy canvas. Inside wasn't money, or guns, or passports. It was a high-end encrypted laptop, a satellite Wi-Fi router, and a stack of external hard drives. "Victor thinks he won the physical fight," Leo said, his voice turning cold. "He thinks bleeding me out in my office puts him in charge of the city. He's an animal. He only understands teeth and claws. But you and I know where the real power is." Charlene looked down at the electronics. Her pulse quickened. This was her language. "You want me to ruin him," she said softly. "I want you to erase him," Leo corrected. "Every offshore account, every shell company he uses to pay his muscle, every dirty penny he's laundered through the dock workers' union. Drain it. Move it to the blind trusts. When the sun comes up tomorrow, I want Victor Romano to be the poorest man in Chicago." She looked back at him. He was lying on a bare mattress, bleeding, stripped of his suits and his soldiers. Yet, he was looking at her like she was the deadliest weapon in his arsenal. Charlene reached down and picked up the laptop. It felt heavy and solid in her hands. She sat at the small, rickety desk in the corner of the room, booted up the router, and opened the screen. The blue light washed over her face. "Give me the master passwords," she said. It took 6 hours. The quiet hum of the laptop fan was the only sound in the room, save for Leo's steady, deep breathing from the bed. Charlene entered a fugue state. The panic that had choked her in the office evaporated, replaced by the cold, calculating logic of mathematics. Numbers didn't carry knives, spreadsheets didn't bleed. She bypassed Victor's pathetic two-factor authentication on his Cayman accounts. She systematically unraveled the dummy corporations he'd set up under his wife's maiden name. She found the payroll for his enforcers and rerouted it into a frozen IRS holding account. By 3 a.m., Victor Romano technically didn't exist on paper. He had zero liquidity. He couldn't buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay an army to hunt them down. Charlene hit the final execute key. The screen flashed green. Transfer complete. She let out a long, shuddering breath and leaned back in the chair. Her back ached. Her eyes burned from the harsh glare of the screen. "It's done," she said. The silence that followed was heavy. She turned around. Leo was awake, watching her. The dim light cast long shadows over his face, making his sharp jaw and deep-set eyes look almost skeletal. He didn't ask if she was sure. He didn't ask for proof. He simply pulled his burner phone from his discarded trousers on the floor, dialed a number, and put it on speaker. It rang once. "Rossi!" Victor's voice spat through the tiny speaker. He sounded frantic, panicked. "What did you do? You son of a bitch, my accounts are locked. The union guys are threatening to walk. Where is my money?" Leo's smile was a terrifying thing. It didn't touch his eyes. "You came into my house, Victor. You made a mess on my floor. I told you I handle the books. And right now, your book is closed." "You give it back," Victor screamed. The sound of glass shattering echoed in the background of the call. "I'll kill you. I'll find you, and I'll skin you, and that fat bitch secretary." Leo hung up. He tossed the phone onto the bed. "He's dead," Leo said flatly. "Without money, he has no men. By tomorrow afternoon, the New York families will hear he's broke, and they'll take his territory. He'll be found in the trunk of a sedan before the weekend." Charlene stared at the blank screen of the laptop. She had just killed a man. She hadn't pulled a trigger, but she had signed his death warrant with a series of keystrokes. A profound, hollow silence settled in her stomach. "I'm a criminal," she whispered. Leo swung his legs over the side of the bed. He winced, gripping his ribs, but forced himself to stand. He walked over to her slowly, his bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. He stopped right behind her chair. "You're a survivor," he corrected. He placed his hands on her shoulders. His palms were hot against her skin. The tension in her muscles was wound so tight she thought she might snap. But his heavy, grounding touch forced her to exhale. "You did what had to be done," Leo said, leaning down. His chest pressed lightly against her back. "You protected what's ours." "Ours?" The word echoed in the quiet room. Charlene closed the laptop. She didn't try to pull away from his grip. She realized, with a terrifying clarity, that she didn't want to. The normal world, the world of safe, boring spreadsheets, lonely evenings with her cat, and men who looked right through her, felt like a dream. This was reality. The blood, the code, the heavy weight of the man standing behind her. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady. "Now we rebuild," Leo said. He reached down, his fingers trailing lightly along the side of her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. "Victor's territory belongs to me now. The family is going to need a new financial structure. Someone who understands the architecture of the money. Someone who doesn't flinch when the glass breaks." He stepped around the chair, forcing her to look up at him. He was a ruthless, violent man. But looking down at her, there was absolute devotion in his dark eyes. He didn't see a helpless girl. He saw a partner. He saw an equal. "No more sitting at the front desk, Charlene," Leo murmured, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "You sit at the table. With me." Charlene looked at his bruised, battered face. She thought about the millions of dollars she had just moved in the dark. She thought about the undeniable, magnetic pull of the man holding her. She took a deep breath, letting the scent of stale blood and cheap floor wax fill her lungs. "I'm going to need a better chair," she said. Leo's lips finally curved into a genuine smile. "Whatever you want, Mia Regina." There was no severance package in this life. But as Charlene leaned into his touch, the cold fear finally melting into something dark and powerful, she realized she didn't want to leave anyway. She was exactly where she belonged. Charlene didn't just survive the mob. She rewrote the rules. From invisible secretary to the undisputed queen of the underworld, she proved that real power isn't about the gun you hold, but the mind behind the money. If you loved this dark, slow burn shift from hostage to equal partner, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a fiercely competent heroine, and don't forget to subscribe.